You're listening to Boobies and Noobies. Find and follow Boobies and Noobies at Boobies Podcast across platforms and on boobiesandnoobies.com. And don't forget at Real Kelly Ray on TikTok, because TikTok thinks I'm making porn if I use boobies in the handle. Thanks, TikTok! Welcome to Boobies and Noobies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and happy 2024 romance readers. Not only is it a brand new year, but 2024, I'm happy to say, also marks the start of our 8th season of podcasting here at Boobies and Noobies. Whether you are a new listener or you have stuck by Boobies and Noobies since the very beginning, I just wanted to extend a warm thank you and welcome. It's because of listeners and romance readers like you that I am excited to still be making this podcast. And I know that things have changed and evolved on the podcast, especially in the last year since I started publishing my own romance books. But I've decided that in 2024, I am going to embrace that change. Expect to see a little bit of the old, or should I say classic, Boobies and Noobies in 2024. Book reviews are coming back, although I might change up the format of those episodes a little bit. As I've mentioned before, now that I'm writing romance novels, I think there's an ethical problem to me reviewing romance novels on this podcast. However, that doesn't mean that I don't want to talk about them, especially the ones that I love and want to recommend to you all. Expect to also see a little bit of new Boobies and Noobies. I've already got a few fun new segments planned with new and returning guests of the podcast. And of course, later this year, we will be back for the 12 Days of Boobsmas. Our holiday special is a staple of Boobies and Noobies, so no matter where this podcast takes me or how things change, you can always expect to hear about holiday romance from me. One quick word before I'm on to my usual business before every episode, and that's to say that the first few episodes you're going to be hearing this year were recorded in fall of 2023. So if you hear us talking about the holidays or I happen to mention my upcoming novella, that's why. Between my publishing schedule and the 12 Days of Boobsmas, I didn't get around to editing every episode that I wanted to in 2023, but I'm making up for it now. Thank you again for listening. Happy New Year to everybody, and thanks for choosing Boobies and Noobies as the podcast you're listening to today. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I'd like to remind you that you can always catch up on past episodes of the podcast on our website, boobiesandnoobies.com, or on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow Boobies and Noobies across social media platforms at Boobies Podcast or at Real Kelly Ray on TikTok. If you're a fan of the podcast and you've got a few minutes to spare, I would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to be the first to know what we're reading next, have instant access to special events like our monthly Boobies Unlimited book club, and so much more, you might consider hopping on over to our Patreon page. As per usual, I will include links for all of the above in today's show notes. And now, please join me in welcoming the author of You've Been Served, a perfect mashup of Legally Blonde and Jasmine Guillory's The Proposal. It's Kristen Alicia. Kristen, congrats on your rom-com debut.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so excited. I'm really happy to be here today.
I'm super happy to chat with you. And I have to say, first of all, I fell in love with your book just from the cover alone. I am truly that person that, you know, the whole saying of like, don't judge a book by its cover. I'm that person that is a hoe for a good cover. Like, I love them. And like, you show me one that's bright and colorful, like I am there. So if that wasn't enough, when I heard it described as Legally Blonde meets Jasmine Guillory's The Proposal, I was sold. So you've got some excellent comps for your book for sure.
Yeah, so Legally Blonde is a favorite of mine, as is Jasmine Guillory. So, you know, it felt right.
Yeah. I mean, in general, how can you not be a fan of Legally Blonde? Like, I setting aside Jasmine Guillory's book because, I mean, I know not everyone reads romance, although they should. That is why we have podcasts like this. But there's no way that you cannot be a fan of Legally Blonde. Like, it's impossible.
Right? It's like kind of the perfect movie. It's phenomenal. It's Reese Witherspoon. You got what? Oh no, Luke Wilson.
Luke Wilson, the other one.
The other Wilson brother. And they're just like, they're fun. They're great.
Yeah.
Sweet little puppy. It's all amazing. Love it.
I don't know if you're
Jennifer Coolidge. Can't forget her.
Right? Oh my God. And Selma Blair, who I just adore as a human being. Yeah. The only part about it that makes me sad is that Vincent Garber is like the bad guy because honestly, I love him too. I always think of him as the king in the Cinderella movie with Brandy.
Oh my gosh, right, that was him.
Yeah, him and Whoopi, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Which, I'm sorry, in my opinion is the best Cinderella adaptation.
I mean, it's Brandy as Cinderella. You kind of can't beat that.
Yeah, to this day, I still call it Brandy Cinderella. Like, it's like, oh, are we talking about animated Cinderella? Are we talking about remake Cinderella? Or are we talking about Brandy Cinderella?
Right. That is the first Cinderella I showed my daughter, so.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I don't know if she got it, but it's great. I love it.
Well, hopefully it'll stick with her as long as it stuck with me.
Yes, let's hope so.
Now, I also, not to harp on Legally Blonde forever, but I will say, I don't know if you're a musical fan. I'm a, theater kid. And so I have to say Legally Blonde, the musical, is definitely one of the better movie to musical adaptations.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
But I absolutely need to. I love musicals. Love musicals. And so it's on my list.
Highly recommend. The music is great. It's one of those ones that, like, if you're like me and you like to listen to show tunes in the car and like sing along with them.
Absolutely.
It's one that you can definitely just listen to, and it's great. And then obviously if you see it, it's even better.
I have to add it to my to-see list.
There you go. That's your musical theater tip of the day.
Yes.
Well, before we dive deeper into this book, I also did want to I had to mention it because I saw it in your author bio. Not only do we both love musicals, but is it true that you live in Oakland, California?
Absolutely. Born and raised.
I am born and raised in Alameda, California. So Oakland is basically my sister city.
Yay. Right across the bridge, right through the tunnel. Love it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I definitely don't meet enough authors living in the Bay Area, let alone who are born and raised in the Bay Area. And even though I live up in the Pacific Northwest now, with a lot of people from the Bay Area. Right. I always love meeting other Bay Area people, so that makes me happy.
Yay, that makes me happy too. I love the Bay Area. I've left a couple times. I left for undergrad to LA, so meet me in Los Feliz.
Yes.
Awesome.
That's great. It's always funny when people actually understand the title because I knew that I chose like one of the most obscure neighborhoods for the title. But the best thing is when somebody will tell me that they read my book and they're like, oh my God, if you have lived in LA, it's extra funny because like, these different neighborhoods and places that you're mentioning in the book. And that definitely makes me happy. I know it's not going to be most readers, but like, that's fine. It's that extra little, cherry on top for some people.
Totally. Well, and obviously now I need to read it. I love living in LA. No, obviously I like the Bay more. I came back, so I don't know.
It's true. There's definitely, I feel like when I was a kid, it was almost like put upon us, like Northern Californians, we don't like SoCal. Like that's not for us.
I know, it absolutely was. And it's funny though, because I actually loved living in Southern California.
I did too. I think it surprised me because I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. And because I lived down there for 5 years and I really did enjoy it. And what I loved most about it is that there was just always something to do. And I'm sure you can say that about like most big cities, but yeah, that's really what I loved about it. And I mean, obviously because of the weather, you can, not only is there something to do all the time, but it's like there's the weather to be able to do it all the time.
Exactly. Like, and it's great because you can go from beach to mountains pretty quickly in LA.
Yeah, it's
Like
true.
gorgeous beaches, there's always something to do, and right, like the weather is always kind of pristine. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Enough about me and my books and the Bay Area. But although I could talk about all these things for many more hours, but I think that's a different podcast. Let's talk about you and your debut release. So
Really
you've
sure.
been served. By the time this episode comes out, this book will be out in the world. So before we even get to the book, I'd love to just know about you and your romance reading and writing journey. How did it all begin?
Sure. So, my romance reading journey, I think like most romance writers, their romance reading journey started early. So, I vividly remember my going into the back room at my grandmother's house and finding this gigantic box, like huge box, full of like 1970s ish
Yep.
YA romance. I read through them all in, I mean, days, weeks. Like it did not take long. And I just fell in love with them. And you progress from like YA to more adults. And so by the
Mm-hmm.
time I was, I don't know, 13, 14, I was reading like full blown romances. Love them, love the heroes, love the heroines, just love the whole thing. And I've always loved to write. I've always loved to write. I didn't necessarily see myself writing a book. Not for like any specific, I guess I never really thought about it. My writing had always been more like either academic or for school or like writing articles, but I never thought like, okay, yeah, let's write a book. And then one day I kind of did. And it seemed kind of natural for me to write a romance because I read so much romance and I love the genre. I just absolutely love the genre. And I wanted to kind of celebrate that.
Oh, and it deserves to be celebrated. I mean, again, there's a
Absolutely.
reason I started this podcast, and it was all to celebrate the genre that I love to read the most with newbies to the romance genre, especially those who are maybe naysayers of the romance genre. And, damned if I'm not determined to change their minds. So I've been
Exactly.
trying to do it for 5 years now, and it's been going pretty well.
Excellent. We'll get everyone on our side.
I know it's true. Build our own army. No, it is funny though how many. I think you nailed it in saying that your romance. A lot of romance writers that kind of start reading at a young age, and it's true. Like how many of us have these stories where we borrowed them from insert family member here. It's grandma or mom or aunt, or I think one time it was they grabbed them from like the cabin that they were staying at for vacation.
Yes, I actually, now that you say that, the first, like, I read Circle of Friends by Rosamund Pilcher up in Vancouver, and
Okay.
that was like one of the first, like, more adult romances I read. I remember it so vividly. I remember like the cover, I remember the whole thing. It was great.
I love that. I remember, like you, my first stack of romance novels came from the garage at my parents' house. They were the books that my mom had already read and kind of just stacked away in the garage. But I remember one of the first books that I bought was at the airport. I grabbed
Mhm.
it. It was a Lisa Kleypas book, and I grabbed it at the airport, and I for sure read a good chunk of that book on that plane ride.
Yep. The airport's kind of another good place because, especially as like a young person, you can
Yeah,
just buy this book and nobody's really noticing what you're doing necessarily. You just read it
right.
on the airplane. It's great, especially if it's like, something your parents may not necessarily want you to read. As
It's
these
true.
things sometimes go.
Yeah, it is true. And I definitely got a later start than I think a lot of people did when it came to like my romance reading journey. Not that there's a good or bad age for
Right.
these things, as we've learned from so many interviews and so many episodes that everybody's journey is different. I've talked to authors who didn't start reading romance until their 30s, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But yeah, I it just always amazes me how many of us kind of started reading romance because of somebody else, whether it was like directly or indirectly. But yeah, we get to be the enablers and like pass off the
Exactly.
books to people.
feel like for a long time it was this like clandestine thing, like, oh, you read a romance? And so you
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, someone hands you a book or you find it. But now, who doesn't love, well, lots of people, I guess, don't love romance, but they should love romance. It's
They
amazing.
just don't know any
They
better.
just don't know about it.
That is my theory in a nutshell, is like, I think the majority of people who say they don't read romance or they scoff at the idea of reading romance, I don't think they've ever read one. I mean, really,
Agreed.
that's the impetus behind this entire podcast, is that I talked about reading romance for a decade and had friends, coworkers, teachers even, who would, make snide comments about what I chose to read. And so eventually I started a podcast and said, hey, have you read one? Do you want to come read one and talk about it and see how you feel after reading it? And
Right.
I would say the response has been overwhelmingly positive from those guests that I've had who had never read one before.
Right. They make a lot of assumptions about something they've never experienced. And once
It's
they
true.
experience, romance is fantastic. It's happy, it's sad, it's funny, it can be anything. And there's so many subgenres. It's amazing.
Well, let's talk about your debut. And I mean, I think the best way to kick it off is just for you to give a brief synopsis about your book, You've Been Served.
So, Simone Alexander is a chef in Oakland, and she kind of starts getting fed up with being a chef. And this doesn't give anything away. This is like in the prologue. So, she gets fed up with being a chef, but she's broke. She like isn't moving forward. So, she kind of is at her wit's end. And so, something she's been doing since she was young is asking a magic 8 ball what she should do. So, she asked this magic 8 ball after she quits her job as a chef if she should go to law school. And there's a variety of reasons why she did, why she thinks law school. And the magic 8 ball tells her yes. And so she leaves from California to Michigan, where she's wholly unprepared for law school. She just doesn't know really anything about what law school should look like. But her first day, she encounters a professor that's a little rough and a fellow classmate that's a little bit obnoxious in class. But as she kind of moves through her first year of law school, she learns that you got to kind of try in law school. It's not going to be all handed to you. But in the process, she makes some really great friends, meets a really, really handsome guy named Silas Whitman, who really kind of helps her navigate the whole process. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
No, that's great. Excellent job. I mean, I feel like this is probably, you're getting very used to having to give this elevator description, like, for it's all part of the process of publishing. Well, and I have to say, I'm super excited to read this one because obviously I love Legally Blonde, so I love that tie-in to that. I love that she's from Oakland. What I found really interesting about the idea of this, well, there's a couple things. I'll get to the magic 8 ball in a second. But what I found really interesting about this is I feel like I don't get to read about a lot of women in law. Like I feel like that's not something that I see enough of in romance novels. And I think even less than that is seeing people, especially women, start over from like going from one high intensity job to another. But really, she's going back to school. I mean, I feel like that is something that we definitely don't see enough of because we tend to associate like certain ages. And again, I hate that this is something that we prescribe mostly to women in our society. It's just, you need to reach this milestone by a certain age. You need to go to school by a certain age. And so I love the idea of her not only starting a completely different career, uprooting her life and going, across the country, but also going back to school, which I think is great.
Yeah, I thought it was something really relatable. There's this sort of narrative that we figure out after high school or after college what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. And
I wish.
right, exactly. That's just not realistic. People don't do that, especially nowadays. They change jobs more frequently. And more than that, they change careers more frequently. I wanted Simone to be a woman that is strong, but definitely, is really at a crossroads, and not, it didn't matter what age she was. She was just at this crossroads in her life, and she knew she needed something new. And she's kind of driven, she's very smart, but, she was just a little unprepared. She just wasn't sure. She knew she needed to make a change. She just hadn't necessarily determined what that change would be until she was kind of in it. And so yeah, I really wanted her to I wanted to be realistic. I wanted to show this is something that happens to people of all ages, not just young men or older men or whoever. This happens to women. This happens to older women, younger women. And she's younger, but she's not young. She's not 18. And so she's had this whole career, and she's like, I need to do something different. And you're right. You don't see women as much, you know, in the romance genre as, the high powered, whatever attorney. You see a lot of heroes that are, yay, the like rich attorney, and that's great. And I think that is great. But there's also women that do that.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to show that. And, for Simone, there's a lot of growth as she goes through her first year of law school. So it's not immediately apparent necessarily that she is very capable and smart and all those things, but she very much is, and you see that by the end of the book. She does okay. She figures her life out.
How dare you give it away like that?
This happy ending in a romance. Who knows?
I did think it was interesting. I love combing through author bios, in case you haven't noticed already, but I loved that you mentioned your eclectic background when it came to the different jobs and careers that you've had, because I feel like this is another thing we have in common is I love the fact that I've worked in so many different industries, but I did note that one of the careers that you had on this list was attorney, and of course wondered if any of the stories from your days working as attorney factored into the book at all.
Absolutely. I am an attorney. I don't practice anymore, but I did for about 6 years. And I was a little bit of a fish out of water when I started law school. Not quite as much as Simone, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And as it turned out, it wasn't practice law, but I didn't know that at the time. So yeah, I went to law school, practiced for a while, but sort of the the inspiration for the Magic 8 Ball was I had a really good friend in law school. We were sitting and talking about something, and I just said, he asked me something about school. I didn't know the answer. And it wasn't something, something I probably should have known, but I didn't. And he goes, how did you end up here? Did you ask a Magic 8 Ball if you should go to law school? I was like, you're kind of a crappy human. He's not. He's actually great. He was very much kidding. But it's like, that would be funny, though, if I had. And so, yeah, that was kind of the inspiration.
And thus the story was born.
Exactly. Many, many, many years later, but yes.
I love a good Magic 8 Ball, let me tell you. And I have to say, for anybody that hasn't visited Kristen's website, you have a virtual Magic 8 Ball on there, which I just think is the cutest damn thing. I love that you have that on there. And you better believe I took advantage of that before we hopped on here. I was like, I have to give this a go. So I absolutely did ask a question.
You have to. Magic 8 Balls are so much fun. Like I have one floating around here somewhere. They're phenomenal. They're,
Everybody needs one. Everybody needs one.
Exactly. I've been doing Instagram lives, answering romance questions with my Magic 8 Ball, and it's been so much fun.
I love that.
You have to ask it a couple times, but it's fun.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and then obviously one thing that I did want to touch on in regards to this book, and this, again, something that we don't see enough of in romance is the concept of not only writing Black joy, but writing Black joy without trauma-based backgrounds and experiences, which I think is nowadays, we definitely do need to have these moments. Like we need to experience joy, Black joy, queer joy. These are the stories that fat joy. That's what I try to write in my book. So I really applaud you for taking that on, but did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think it's really important, partially in publishing, but kind of everywhere. You see a lot of Black trauma, queer trauma, fat trauma, all of the above. And, it just feels like, can we just live? You know? Like, it doesn't have to be trauma. It can be, but everybody comes from lots and lots of different backgrounds, and they're not all trauma based. I think it's really important to address the trauma if that's what you want to address. But for me, it was important to just talk about Black joy. The things that were hard for Simone were just life things. She didn't come from this traumatic background. She was just having a rough life experience, but it wasn't really traumatic. It was just she's having a hard time. And mostly, I wanted her to be happy and fulfilled and all those things without coming from from a background that's harsher than it needed to be, because that just wasn't her experience. And so I think it's really important to show joy in all kinds of ways.
Oh no, I definitely know. That's
Right. I mean,
that's it. Just is always it's always amazing to me how. And I feel like I see this conversation pop up every once in a while on either book Twitter or book talk, but just this idea that like we can forego so many realities in the books that we read, especially in romance where it's fantasy. It's all based in fantasy. Obviously there's shreds of reality because love is a universal concept. It's something that is understandable in every language, worldwide. But it just is wild to me that like people will be so picky when it comes to talking about, well, that's not realistic, in certain books, like, and it always comes back to marginalized communities, which just is like, I'm sorry, you can read about this person in the 1500s fucking a monster, but like, God forbid we have two Black characters falling in love without any sort of trauma in between.
Exactly. And like that's like the perfect example. And it's always people outside of the community that have issues with it. It's never the community. It's very rarely the community itself. So it's like, well, okay, you're willing to accept this one thing, but you can't accept this. You're reading a book. I mean, I'm sure most we're writers, you base things in reality, but also these things are out of my head. Like, this is a character out of my head. This is a love out of my head. All of these events are out of my head. Like, I came up with this. So, okay.
Yeah. If you can read about monsters, if you can read about Regency era and people don't have syphilis, like you can read about Black joy.
And they live past 25. Like, come on.
That's and I love reading a historical romance, but I always like there's a part of me that's always screaming in the back of my head, these people are diseased. Like everyone, the rivers are full of poop. Like there's just, I can't let it go.
They all need antibiotics now.
It's true. Yeah, no, I love that you're doing that. And I think we need more stories like that. And like we said, obviously it's an intersectional issue as well, that it's like, I want to see more stories of queer joy. We're just coming out of Pride Month. That's important to me when I'm writing my books. I include a lot of queer characters, and it's not necessarily what defines them. It's just, that's part of who they are. And they just happen to love everyone.
I think that's a really great way to put it. That's not what defines them. That's just a piece of who they are. No one thing defines anybody, or at least hopefully
exactly.
Not.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm super excited to read this one. And like I said, for anybody who's listening, obviously this episode will come out when the book is already out. So hopefully you've already picked up your copy of You've Been Served. And then I think maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but obviously what I want to ask you is, what's up next?
Well, that's an excellent question. So fingers crossed, I'm working on a follow. Well, it's kind of a follow-up with Tiffany. There's a character named Tiffany. She is Simone's best law school friend. She's awesome. She has a filthy mouth. She
we love it.
lives her best life. She sleeps with whoever she wants. I love her. She is phenomenal. And I'm working on her story.
Nice.
So hopefully that'll be coming out eventually.
And how about future books set in Oakland? Because that's what I want to read.
Yes. Well, so Tiffany's book will be set in Oakland.
Yes.
It's set.
Okay. Fantastic. Yes. That's all I needed.
Yes. It's like all the Oakland happy places. We've got Lake Merritt. We've got Grand Lake Theater, all the things. So yes, it's absolutely set in Oakland, and I'm very excited.
I love it. The food, so good in Oakland. Also, I feel like I read something online that said Oakland has the most theaters per capita, and I was like, what? Of all the cities, like Oakland has the most theaters, but thinking about it, there really is like a thriving art scene just in the Bay Area in general. So
no, absolutely.
Yeah, but there you go. I'm just full of trivia facts today, apparently. Well, that sounds like fun. I hope we get to see that in the near future as well. And then the question that I always like to end on is, what is the dream project? What is the story that just lives rent-free in your brain, waiting to be told?
Oh, that's fun. So I'm sort of gently working on it in my head.
Okay.
But it is a story about a woman in her 40s, like early, or she turns 40, I should say. Yes, I love the idea of an older female main character. And it's sort of a combination of Before Sunset and, I don't know, something else that I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
But it's going to take place in the span of one night. It's living there. I'm not sure when it's going to make its way onto paper, but
I love that. The other, I mean, I know the ages are completely off, but the other thing I think of as my story that I love that's in one night is Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist.
Yes, that's another really, really good one.
I love that movie. And it's, I mean, like Before Sunset, great examples of how much can happen in the span of a night.
So much. So, you could absolutely fall in love over the course of a night.
Yeah.
Over the course of a night.
Yeah.
I like that. I like it. It's very sweet. Very romantic.
That sounds like fun. Okay, well, maybe after Tiffany's book.
Yes, that might be next. We'll see.
We'll see you back in like 2 years, maybe, and see what happens in that time span. Well, this has been so fun chatting with you, Kristen, and I'm super excited for people to read your book. Last but not least, would you mind telling everyone where they can find and follow you and keep up with what's going on with you and your books?
Absolutely. You can visit my website at KristenAliciaWrites.com. Follow me on Instagram at Kristen Alicia Writes, and on Twitter at same handle, I think, Kristen AL Writes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I will be sure to include links for Kristen in today's show notes, so you can always find those directly in there. But in the meantime, while we wrap things up, I'm just going to encourage everyone to go listen to Legally Blonde, the musical, because I'm telling you, it's going to change your life, Kristen. You're going to love it.
As soon as we're done, I'm going to go listen to it. That's going to be my evening. I'm very excited.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and enjoy your release and enjoy your Legally Blonde, the musical.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. Tune in every Friday for a brand new episode of Boobies and Noobies. And don't forget, you can always catch up on previous episodes on your favorite podcast app or on boobiesandnoobies.com. Happy reading!